Welcome to the Equality Trust's series of videocasts on how we can all help reduce inequality. Hi, I'm Priyasani Nicholas, one of the co-executive directors at the Equality Trust. And today I'm speaking to Hannah Paylor, Senior Policy Advocate at Carnegie UK. She'll be telling us about Carnegie's Life in the UK Index, which each year measures collective wellbeing across the UK. It's based on what people in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have told Carnegie about their lives. We'll talk about how the index might be used to influence governments and how it might be used to support the implementation of the socio-economic duty that we at the Equality Trust are campaigning for. Hannah, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
So Hannah, can you give us an overview of the Life in the UK research that Carnegie carries out each year?
Sure. So if it's okay, I'll just start with a bit of a very brief background to Carnegie. So Andrew Carnegie was a philanthropist, and Carnegie was established over 100 years ago. And his deed, or our trust deed, was to improve the well-being of the masses. So Carnegie's kind of modern interpretation, or our modern interpretation of that, is to improve collective well-being. And when we talk about that, we don't mean kind of scented candles and yoga. We mean the systems and structures that really enable people to have a good quality of life. So we look at well-being quite holistically, and we have kind of four areas that we talk about. So we talk about social well-being, being about everybody having their basic needs met and being able to access public services. Economic well-being, being about people having a decent minimum living standard and essentially enough money in their pockets to go about their daily lives. Environmental well-being, so things like access to parks and rivers, and also living within the planet's natural boundaries. And then democratic well-being, being about people having a voice in decisions that impact them. So that's our kind of vision of collective well-being, and our kind of strategy. We have two aims. So to put well-being and that vision of well-being at the heart of decision-making, and also to tackle threats to well-being. So the Life in the UK programme essentially aims to measure collective well-being over time. And what we really hope is that it'll help governments across the UK to pay attention to the things that really matter. So rather than just focusing on economic growth, having a more kind of holistic or rounded understanding of how people are doing and how they're living over time. And so how we do that, essentially, we work with a research agency who undertake the 26 question survey, and they ask questions of people based on those four different areas that I talked about. So things like if somebody was alone and needed help, would there be somebody in the neighbourhood that they could call on for help? Do they feel safe walking alone at night? Do they feel like they can influence the decisions that impact them? Can they would they be able to afford a one-off expense of £850 if they needed to? And then the idea is to kind of distill that data into a single score that then we can measure over time, essentially. So there was, I think, just over 6,000 respondents that we speak to every year. And yeah, the idea is that we'll be able to kind of measure over time. And what was quite interesting about this year's index was that the field work, it was May when we went into the field last, I say this year, I mean 2024, it was May 2024 that went into the field, and that's just before the new government. So it's a benchmark really for them as well to build on.
Thanks for that overview, Hannah. So where are the big findings this year? What have we learnt?
The story of life in the UK in 2024 is one of stagnant well-being. So the collective well-being score for the UK as a whole in 2024 was 61 out of possible 100. And yeah, if you remember that we see 100 as being the basic level for everybody to have their basic needs met. Social well-being, the score was 72. Economic well-being was 71. Environmental well-being was 62, and democratic well-being was 40. Yeah, and then I think what's quite interesting, is maybe quite interesting to your network as well, is when we boil the data down, and see depths of difference between different demographics. So we were able to look at things. So there were four factors that have a really significant influence on the wellbeing score. So the first is household income. So people with an income under 26,000 had a score that was 12 points lower than those with an income above 52,000. The next was housing tenure, so the type and status of housing, and people living in social housing in particular have an average collective wellbeing score of 51, which is 13 points lower than the score for homeowners. The next was disability, so people with disability have, I think it's an average collective wellbeing score of 55 by comparison to those without a disability, which is 64. And then coming back to that location point that I started with, I'm just looking at, 13 points between the different index of multiple deprivation. So those four factors were the most significant when we worked with statisticians to kind of boil the data down, but others were significant too. So things like age, whether people lived in urban or a rural area, ethnicity, gender, and the number of kids in the household as well.
Thank you. And would you say that income inequality or wealth inequality is a big factor?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the key thing that came out at the top was the impact of wealth inequality then on different areas that I just touched on as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. And I think, we would want everybody, regardless of those characteristics, to have the same score.
And I just have a follow-up question, if that's all right. It's about links to government. The purpose of the wellbeing score is to influence government and influence government policy. Are they quite receptive to that? I mean, is there an established route to do that? Or are you, like other organisations, just trying to find ways to influence?
I think it's a bit of both. I think, so Carnegie is quite special, I guess, in terms of, because we work across the UK from Scotland, and because we work with governments in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, to be honest, it's kind of dependent on the government. So Wales, for example, has kind of world-leading wellbeing legislation, and Scotland similarly has its national performance framework, which we see as a wellbeing framework, a vision for how the country can progress. I think UK government's different. It's been different. I guess with a new government, there's an opportunity. So I think we're quite excited about the possibilities around that.
I know you've mentioned there's been movement and adoption of some kind of wellbeing economy in Wales and in Scotland, but has there been anything like this for England or for the UK as a whole?
Not yet, is my honest answer in terms of the new UK government. Local authorities, actually, there's some real nice examples at local authority level. So the North of Tyne Combined Authority, it's recently changed, we've got to become bigger, but they did some really good work on basically what we call a wellbeing framework. So a vision for the region based on the experiences and views of the people that live there, and think about the outcomes that those people want to achieve, and that would be important to kind of see that progress. So yeah, there is kind of good work happening at local level.
Yeah, that's really interesting because one of the tools that we've been campaigning for in a bid to reduce inequality is the socioeconomic duty. I don't know if you know about that. It's an uncommenced part of the Equality Act, which was passed in 2010. The whole act was drafted by Labour, by the outgoing Brown Labour government, and enacted by the incoming coalition. And the whole of the Equality Act was enacted except for this one clause, Section 1, which is the socioeconomic duty. And it requires all public bodies to pay due regard to the equality of outcome for people experiencing socioeconomic struggles, to make sure that strategic decisions don't impact on the outcomes for those people. And what kind of spurred me to make that link was that you mentioned the North Tyneside Combined Authority, and they were one of the first people within local authorities to commence the duty. And we had a very similar thing there as well, where we were trying to campaign nationally for commencement and we weren't seeing any success. So we pivoted to local authorities. And as one of the first local authorities that adopted it was the North Tyneside. And it was also adopted as a mandatory measure in Scotland when devolution allowed that to happen. And then when devolution practices changed, it was also adopted by Wales. So yeah, it's quite interesting now for me to think about, whether these wellbeing frameworks, what they might look like and how it might support the commencement of the socio-economic duty, which the Labour government now has committed to. It was in their manifesto and we've already been working with them. So it feels like a really interesting kind of angle. So in the place of where, there are wellbeing frameworks like Scotland or Wales, what kind of difference might people expect to be able to see? What's the material difference to them and how might their lives be different?
That's such a good question. It's a great question. It's a really difficult one to answer because I think there's been varied levels of success in terms of it being taken forward kind of in that holistic way. The example that we quite often go to is the New Zealand government, the previous one. And so they had I think it's the Living Standards dashboard, and essentially a wellbeing budget. So I don't know if you've heard about it.
Yeah.
So what that was essentially I guess a dashboard similar to what we're trying to achieve with the Life in UK Index, where the government could measure progress against the different outcomes and then direct their budget decisions based on kind of what they were seeing in terms of those outcomes. And I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding in terms of it wasn't the entire budget, it wasn't the entire New Zealand budget, but it was a section that they put aside that said, okay, this is going to focus on long-term change, and we're going to use the dashboard to inform the decisions. And then what they did was, choose the areas where kind of outcomes were less or they weren't seeing progress, and then direct funding and resource to those areas. So I think that's the potential. Again, I don't think it's a shame because there's a change in government, and I don't think that's now being progressed.
Yeah, at the Equality Trust, we talk about the need for real transformative change. We're experiencing a crisis of inequality, and that's what's really driving these levels of discontent and falling living standards. So what would your recommendations for change be? Do they fall into the transformative bucket?
Yeah, so we have 3 recommendations coming out of this work. So one is to measure what matters. And it's quite an old argument, but I think we'll keep saying it until it happens. Like economic data like GDP, it's a good measure of the economy, but it's a very poor measure of anything else. And at Carnegie, we really believe that you need to be able to monitor and track and communicate the progress across a range of outcomes to actually be able to understand where progress needs to be made and to bring about social change. I think we just coming back to the issue of democracy, we really think that there's almost a missed opportunity in the Labour manifesto, and that repairing democracy is kind of a missing mission. Our evidence is really clear that not enough is being done to really rebuild trust in the people that we elect to represent us. And we really think that methods like more participatory methods of engagement and deliberative processes are really essential to rebuilding that trust. But what we also believe is that they can't be done in a tokenistic way. And actually, we did a separate piece of research where we found that, actually, if you don't do it properly, that those processes can actually be more damaging because people just leave more disappointed that they said something and nothing was done as a result. And then the third thing is about kind of this fresh approach to governing. So the UK government has outlined its intention to deliver a mission-driven government. And for us, that really means kind of having ambitious, measurable, long-term objectives. and our work from working in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland has really shown us that there can't be any kind of gap between rhetoric and reality, and it really relies on kind of departmental working and not working in silos, that actually an outcomes-based approach can really help with, because it's people working towards shared outcomes rather than kind of individual objectives. So yes, those are our kind of three recommendations from the report.
Oh, they sound really amazing. And I think I especially like the measure what matters. GDP, like you say, measures one thing and one thing only, and it's not an indicator of well-being, and it's not an indicator of happiness, and it's not an indicator of standards of living necessarily. It's just an indicator of consumption, of growth, and that's not necessarily what's going to drive change and quality of life and a good life for everybody. Yeah, and another thing I wanted to come back and ask you about was, have you got any recommendations for what can be done and how people can get involved in that change-making process?
So I think, and it kind of comes back to what you were talking about at the beginning, I think we really believe in the power of the movement. And actually, like part of the reason for doing this research was to provoke debate and discussion. And Carnegie, we're not precious. There are other measures are available. So I guess, and we're not precious about life in the UK as the measure, but we just really want to inspire and provoke a conversation about ways that you can measure and understand society.
Yes.
And I think we've found as an organisation, you get a lot of pushback. What about this? What about that? And you don't have that same pushback for measures like GDP. So I think we are quite open that it's an experiment. And so I think the ask or the invitation is to get involved in terms of look what other measures are out there, but also we're very open as an organisation. We've got this big kind of data set that we want to be able to share. And if as other kind of charities or organisations are interested and would like to kind of delve into the more demographic detail, that we'd be really pleased to have a conversation and to share that and make it available.
That's fantastic. Just in and of itself, I think. And like I mentioned before, we do a lot of work in supporting local authorities to implement the socioeconomic duty, and having access to data for that would be great. Does it go to local level?
No. So it goes it goes to regions. It's something that we're looking into in the future. But we can definitely signpost to other organisations that do go to that detail.
Yeah, that sounds really handy for so many organisations that are responsible for implementing the socioeconomic duty. They'd be able to use the data and then to show any improvements or show how where their baseline is and where they need to go. That's fantastic. So Hannah, just our last question, is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think just that I'd just like to reiterate the invitation to get in touch and to have a conversation. We really want Life in the UK to be used as a vehicle to provoke that conversation, either with us or with other people.
So Hannah, thanks so much for explaining the research and its key findings. It's great that Carnegie UK are investing in this research from year to year and helping to give government some ideas of how they might be progressing or not progressing. It was disappointing, but maybe not surprising to hear that you found people only scored their well-being as 61 out of 100. And quite worrying that democratic well-being was so far down at 40 out of 100. And that really makes me feel the importance of what we're trying to do here at the Equality Trust, for people to have more power in addressing issues that affect them, and to build a new vision of a new society based on different structures so that everyone can have a good life. We hope that what you've talked to us about today will encourage everyone watching to find out more about wellbeing and inequality in the UK here at equalitytrust.org.uk, and to join in trying to improve things. Hannah Paylor of Carnegie UK, thank you, and a big thank you to everyone who's been watching. If you enjoyed this video cast, do let your friends know, and you can find us at www.equalitytrust.org.uk. Our ability to reduce inequality begins with imagining a more equitable future and experimenting with new ways to achieve it. So search out our growing collection of videocasts featuring experts and activists who are helping us all understand what we can do to reduce inequality.